So things like moving to disqualify judges is like can be a touchy subject, right? Nobody wants to do that. I'm going to be really honest with you. Nobody ever wants it to come to you're having to have a discussion with the judge, like, should you be on this case? I mean, right? It is
Yeah.
terribly uncomfortable. It's just, oh, and you know how awkward everything is going to be.
Hello and welcome to the Attorney Post, where we give you the inside scoop with top attorneys in their field. And now, here's our host, Justin West.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Attorney Post, where we discuss what's going on in various facets of the law with lawyers at the top of their game to help you navigate the ins and outs of various legal fields and jurisdictions. Because if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. Today, I'm very pleased to be joined by Lauren Varnado, and I realized I didn't remind myself how to say your name, so hopefully I said your name correctly. But Lauren, how are you doing today?
Nobody says it right. So, and I always have to say you have to put a real Southern emphasis on it. So it's Varnado, but nobody says
Varnado.
it right. And don't worry at all. You did great. So anyway, thanks for having me, Justin.
I'm going to edit this in post, and I'll mouth over it so it looks like I got it right and knocked it out of the park. No, I'll
Right.
leave it
That's
out.
awesome. Great. But
Well,
seriously,
thank
nobody else is right.
That's okay. Well, thanks for joining me. Let's jump over, as always, before we get started and take a look. Lauren works with Michelman and Robinson out there, and they have multiple branches. I believe she is down in Texas.
Mhm.
This is their website, and we're going to talk about all the things they do, and really, in particular, all the things that she does down there. This is her actual page, and we will have a link, as always, in the description down below to their website, as well as her listing on their website and her contact information, etc. So if you need someone to work with on the various areas of the law that she works in, which is a very fascinating area of law, she works in petrochemicals and all sorts of really just areas of law that I don't tend to get to talk to people about. So I'm really kind of excited to see where our conversation goes. But we will, as always, have her links down below. That is mrllp.com is the base website. Before we get started, as always, we're going to jump over and read from our sponsors. Our first sponsor today is nationalerc.org. You may have noticed that the world went through a pandemic a couple of years ago, and many businesses were forced to shut down, had reduced hours, reduced supply chain interruptions, and ultimately suffered from reduced revenue in 2020 and 2021. What you may not know is that Congress recently passed the CARES Act, which allocated $400 billion in stimulus funds for small businesses that never needs to be paid back. It's not a loan like the PPP or Paycheck Protection Program. This is functionally free money in the form of a tax credit that your business can use in whatever way you think makes the most sense. Right now, nationalerc.org is still helping small businesses get the maximum amount of money that they can, and you can calculate and see how much you can get back by visiting nationalerc.org. The average small business that they work with gets back over $200,000 to reinvest in their business that never needs to be paid back. Again, the calculator is completely free, and there's never any fee unless they are successful in getting money for you. So if you had to shut down and you had W-2 employees during the pandemic time, visit nationalerc.org and see how much they can earn for you. Our second sponsor is Groove Funnels. If you love spending $5,000 to $10,000 to build a brand new website, you love monthly hosting fees of $500 or more for a platform that lets you do webinars, sell products, have a blog, etc., then by all means keep doing whatever it is you're doing. But if you're like me, you hate that stuff. And that's why I personally recommend Groove Funnels, the all-new, all-in-one, fully inclusive website internet marketing platform from internet marketing legend, Mike Filsaime. Visit theattorneypost.com/groove to sign up completely for free. There's no cost, no credit card required, and you can actually build a website that allows you to sell to customers or clients. There's literally no cost, and you can actually build, I believe, up to 3 fully functioning websites at theattorneypost.com/groove. And they have a huge list of apps for their platform that'll turn it into a webinars platform, a sales platform, a website, a blog, a way to sell affiliate products, to market whatever it is you guys happen to sell. So if you're in the market for a new website, visit theattorneypost.com/groove to get started today for completely free. And there we go. Alrighty. So as I said before, I am joined with Lauren, and hello again, Lauren. Thank you for being here. We had a slight snafu yesterday and weren't able to shoot our call, but that's okay because life gets in the way. And she was out being an awesome attorney as she does. So
Mm.
Uh, Lauren serves as the managing partner of the Houston office of Michelman and Robinson, which again, I'm hoping I'm saying that correctly too. As I say it out loud, I'm like, I think that's right, but every so often I second guess myself. You can correct me in a minute if I said it wrong. She is a key figure in the commercial litigation practice group, focusing on high-stakes legal battles, primarily in the energy sector. Her legal expertise extends to advising on litigation avoidance, risk mitigation, climate change litigation, and also renewable energy investments, along with handling the acquisition and divestiture of oil and gas properties. She holds a bachelor's in history from Texas A&M and her JD from South Texas College of Law in Houston. Her practice has covered significant legal grounds across various legal states, representing clients in disputes related to oil and gas operations, including class action lawsuits, breaches of contract cases, and environmental contamination claims. Her achievements have earned her notable recognition, including being listed among the 500 leading energy lawyers by Law Dragon in 2023, that's just last year, and receiving various accolades from Super Lawyers Magazine, Best Lawyers, and Texas Monthly, highlighting her impact in the energy law and the broader legal community. And of course, we may talk really briefly because she also was a meme in and of herself, who trended across the internet for a very interesting interaction she had in a courtroom at one point. We'll get to that down the road. But having said all that, and that was kind of a mouthful, Lauren, I am sure that I missed a few things. So my first question to you is, what did I miss?
Oh, wow. No, I mean, honestly, you did a great job describing my practice. I guess what did you miss about that aspect? I mean, I am an oil and gas lawyer. I have an upstream and midstream niche. And so people who are in the industry understand what that means. But really, it's about, okay, you got to get the oil and gas out of the ground, and then you have to get it to market. You have eventually, the gas stations where we fill up our cars still. But, and that's way down the line, right? You have oil and gas and all these hydrocarbons that have to be produced and all of these really interesting processes and honestly contracts. And that's where I get excited is really like an upstream oil and gas dispute that's like about nitty gritty oil and gas stuff. So what does that mean? Like about an oil and gas lease, people fighting over royalties. And that's usually, landowners or the mineral owners, how they're getting paid, or, fights between operators, because sometimes oil and gas companies, have some business disputes about their agreements. And I love handling those. I really am an industry lawyer first, trial lawyer second, but I love trying cases. And that is definitely something that makes me, I think, unique among lawyers, particularly. And certainly, I think lawyers of maybe our generation and looking forward. And, we can talk about that later, but that, at least from a practice standpoint, describes me. One thing people may not know about me, at least personally, I'm a true crime junkie. I read at least one book a week just for fun, but they're always nonfiction, usually about true crime, but I follow missing persons cases. Yeah. And so anyway, that's something that people may not know about me that I've never shared on one of these. So.
There you go. I always like to have breaking news. You heard it here first, folks.
Right.
You heard it here first. So as an attorney, have you ever considered going into criminal law? Because then you get to deal with those cases on a firsthand basis, or do you really just want to see the whole thing unraveled by a storyteller?
So it's funny you say that. When I went to law school, I thought I wanted to be a criminal lawyer. And South Texas is, in my opinion and many others' opinion, the premier law school in Houston that feeds into the district attorney's office, meaning a lot of our district attorneys and assistant district attorneys attended my law school.
Wow.
Because it focuses on advocacy. What is advocacy? That is your trial presence. That is your presence in the courtroom. That is how you argue for your client, whether it's in a court or even in, private arbitrations now, which happen outside of a court, but are basically a lawsuit and a trial, just without a jury and their secret. There's that.
Gotcha. So what got you into, because one of my questions is what got you into law and what got you into the particular aspect of law that you did wind up getting into. So I guess question number one is what got you into law? Were you the kid that everyone else was outside, playing ball and you were inside watching Perry Mason? Did you have Lawyer Barbie as a kid? Did you kind of stumble into law? Because I also saw that you're a history major. I actually have my degrees in philosophy and history. So I do want to pick your brain about that briefly too. But what got you into law and what got you into petrochemical law?
So what got me into law, I did watch all those shows, I'm not going to lie, but it was Law and Order, and I remember I was probably like 12, but there was the blonde woman who was the prosecutor, I think, on Law and Order back, it would age me. So, but I saw her doing that in the courtroom, and I was like, I feel like I could do that and that it would be a fun job. No one in my family was a lawyer, has ever been a lawyer. I don't come from a family of lawyers. No one knew. I mean, when I told my parents, oh, I want to be a lawyer, they're like, oh, that's great. I mean, right? Nobody in my family knew. And I have actually found more in the legal profession that actually is kind of unique. I mean, a lot of lawyers do have other lawyers in their families or come from a family of lawyers, have at least ties to that. So again, I kind of fell into it. One could say, thought it sounded great, something I could do. I thought I wanted to be a criminal lawyer, but then found criminal law as a subject matter really boring in law school. I know that sounds weird. The cases, don't get me wrong, like out there in the world are juicy and sound interesting, but the law itself isn't really complex, right? Like these are the elements of murder, okay? I mean, and I found myself drawn, and this is probably the philosophy, maybe history part of me, to like subject or areas of the law that are complicated. Like I really liked tax in law school, which people are like, what is wrong with you? I don't know. But I like the tax code is like it's it's kind of like logic games or something, but you know what I mean? You have a book and it's like following the pieces, you know what I mean? And using it to like put together arguments. I don't know. I liked it. So I just found myself more drawn to that. And then, worked really hard and was blessed, with a clerkship at one of the big law firms in the city. And one of my rotations was through the energy group. And here I am.
Go figure.
That's that's
I completely understand a lot of that trajectory. A lot of my listeners, they already know this, but I'm a marketer by trade, and I've got my degrees in philosophy and history. And so for me, it was, do you want to go to law school or do you want to start a company? And I ended up doing the marketing company instead. But I used to take the practice LSATs because I love those questions, like the logic questions. You're on a roller coaster, and the guy 2 seats in front of you on the left is wearing a sombrero, and he had nachos for dinner, but he's not sitting next to the lady who has a dog, and you have to like figure out who is everybody on the I love those questions.
It's kind of like an investigation.
Yeah, it really is.
So here's my thing on the criminal thing. Would I want to handle those cases as a lawyer? No, definitely not. But like as a fantasy life, like being a detective or like an FBI agent or something, you know what I mean? And doing the investigation part of it on the criminal side sounds fascinating and awesome. And I had a guy who worked for me as an associate at a private law firm who now is an FBI agent. And when he told me he was leaving to do that, he literally told me, he was like, I feel like you're gonna hate me, because I was like, you're doing my dream job, But anyway, I'm just joking. But I like that. I like, about putting, like you said, it does kind of go into, I think, the mindset, and a mindset that's helpful. And it's certainly in litigating as a lawyer.
Well, there you go, folks. And you heard it here first. Tax law, more exciting than criminal law. There you go. Things I would have never expected to hear, but you know what? To teach their own, guys, and it takes all kinds, as they say. It takes all kinds. So you have a degree in history. What is your favorite realm of history to study? Because I was a medievalist by trade. Not that I do much with it anymore, but that was the area I found most fascinating. Although in my later years, as I've become an adult, a parent with kids, and really invested in my country, I found I'm much more interested in American history than I used to be. And some people just like dive into that, and that's their thing, and they don't care. Some people are ancient. So what was your focus in history?
So what's funny, I have like wormholes, one could say. But did you guys have to write a thesis as a history major to graduate? We did. So I'll tell you what mine is, and then maybe that would give you an idea of the randomness of it. I wrote mine about the Chinese cultural practice of foot binding.
Okay.
I mean, right?
Yeah.
I mean, people still die. Like you got a college degree writing about, but it was, I don't know. This is really funny, but American Girl dolls. Go with me.
I've got multiple daughters. I'm familiar with them.
Oh, you do? Okay. They used to send out a magazine when I was little. And in one of the magazines, and they would have an article or two about something like historical. And it was about this girl, and it was a story about her grandmother, and had pictures of like her grandmother's feet. I never forgot it. That's literally like why I wanted to learn like more about it later. So I wrote my thesis about that. But I like World War II. I like Cold War. I've really looked a lot into like Russian history as a part of that. I like a lot of that. And actually like the history of the development of Islamic terrorism. I know it sounds like a weird kind of history.
I took classes in Russian history. I took classes in Islamic history. I found all those equally fascinating. So you're preaching to the choir on this one. My thesis, incidentally, was called Donner Democracy. So we looked at the Donner Party and their trip out west, and the decisions that they made. as the democratic decisions they made that ultimately led to, unfortunately, their demise. The one thing I remember about it, and this is something I've never shared on this podcast before, but if you read through the journals of the people, when they finally rescue like the handful of people that were still alive, there's one guy they rescued in a cabin, and this is a little grisly, but you like true crime, so you're going to enjoy
Yeah,
this.
yeah. I know.
Over in the corner of the cabin, there was like a big hunk of cow. It was basically untouched. And what he actually had on in a soup right then and there was a soup of human lungs and brain. And he said it tasted better. And
Oh,
he'd already gotten used to eating human beings. And so he's
oh.
like, well, I'm just going to eat the thing I want to eat
Yeah, I'm
because
gonna eat. Oh, sorry, my light's like going off. It's fine.
it's okay.
We'll talk in the dark. You can see how rainy it is. I told you it's storming outside. But yeah, no, that is hilarious. Honestly, and I don't know. Yeah, you get used to, and that's so interesting though. And I love that you also wrote on kind of what many would probably say is a random topic.
We had done a whole discussion about the expansion in the 1840s, 1850s. I read there's a wonderful book by a guy named, I want to say DeSoto, and it tracked, and I'm not a Mormon by any means, but it tracked like the Mormon expansion because they were a big part of the Oregon Trail heading out west, settling ultimately in Utah, as everyone knows, which is Mormon Central. And I just found it fascinating. And as far as aspects of history, but I'm a medievalist by trade. That's kind of where I started to get interested in American history because that was just what I was told that this is the area I had to do my thesis on. So anyway, this isn't about me, but
No, I'm very fascinated. And I could go on another tangent after you mentioned Mormons, but I won't. But my other hobby is ancestry and like family tree and genealogy. And I have my own family back to 580.
Oh, wow. Wow. So where is your genealogy? Where did it come from?
I am Scandinavian Brit,
I could
which
see that.
maybe is not surprising to people, right? But yeah, but it was really interesting, and I love it. And you get stories if you hit certain lines, that where they were arguably important, or at least there was some record. Like it's really funny stuff. Like somebody died in a jousting competition, and I feel like my relative would have been that dumb, So I don't know, it's fun, but that's a whole nother discussion. So.
I never got into genealogy, but there's still time. I don't know anything about my father's side. I'm one of those people. So like I could only do like half of my genealogy, but the West family side is it's a hodgepodge, American mutts is what they are. So I think there's Hispanic and whatnot. My wife is full-blooded, 50% Sicilian, 50% Austrian. So I never
Wow.
ever get in a fight with her because she's got Austrian and Sicilian blood in her. But I do find it fascinating. So it's really kind of neat that that's one of your things. So let's talk about law. So you do petrochemical law. What does your day-to-day look like? How do people find you? Actually, and one thing I didn't actually ask you to do is give me your pitch. So somebody has an issue. Tell me who your ideal type of client is. Is it a small landowner who's got minimal rights? Is it a corporation that is trying to meet EPA guidelines? Who is your ideal client? How do they find you, Lauren?
My ideal client, or at least I wouldn't say ideal, but the client that at least if we're going to go straight into like what is my niche, my expertise, my wheelhouse, the kind of cases that I'm an expert and called to handle, primarily oil and gas operators, oil and gas producers, oil and gas transporters. So pipeline companies, what we call EMP companies. You may hear about those in the news, like exploration and production companies. So those are the companies that go and drill for oil and gas. They are not always, the companies whose names are on the gas stations, right? Like there's way more companies that produce oil and gas than those that we just see on gas station signs. Back when I was younger, though, I wouldn't have had any concept of that. But, there is a large diversity of oil and gas producers across the country. But I typically represent shale, so companies operating in the shales, right? You have shale up in Appalachia, so PA, West Virginia, Ohio. You have, of course, Texas, many shales. We have the Eagleford, Oklahoma. You have the Barnett. We have the Permian. And these are and in Texas, it varies because you have more oil than gas. Whereas in Appalachia, it's like the richest gas deposit and really the world, and certainly the country. And then you also have shale in places like Colorado. Utah actually has, recently at least discovered, or people are starting to exploring producing from gas reserves in Utah on a really a larger scale than I think people ever had maybe really thought about. And so it's always changing. It's always interesting, but those are the people who call on me, the companies who are out there, producing oil and gas or processing oil and gas or transporting it by pipeline. And they call me when they have a civil dispute. So meaning a case where everybody's fighting about money. And typically in most of my cases, at least in the oil and gas, like what we're talking about right now, space, I am representing defendants. So as you can imagine, oil and gas producers or companies operating pipelines get sued a fair amount.
Yeah.
As I'm sure you can imagine. And you mentioned earlier climate change. That is one aspect, right, of what you would say is energy law and falls within, kind of my wheelhouse that is, a recent fad, or you could say litigation trend that, is being reported on and that is commonly known. People do see, oh, so-and-so was sued about this or for not making, the right representations about their contributions to the environment, et cetera. So that's definitely like one aspect of recent litigation. Another thing that's come up a lot, winter storm litigation. So for example, Winter Storm Uri, which I lived through as a Houstonian, it was 20 degrees and icy, which I know when you live somewhere up north, it's like, what's wrong with these people? But literally it shut everything down. But at the same time, it froze all these pipelines and all the processing facilities. And you can imagine, I mean, think of the amounts of money. I saw a figure, and I want to say it was in Houston. I mean, millions of lawsuits were filed relating to Winter Storm Uri. And it included, homeowners against the utilities relating to, you didn't give me heat or you charged me XYZ, to, private disputes where it's like, the pipeline is fighting with the processing facility about how much gas they should have delivered and when and what price. And, so there's so many, but I like those, more of the nitty gritty oil and gas, like under complex, because they're very complex contracts about gas deliveries, gas purchases, et cetera. I like to litigate those, and like that would be really interesting to me. So really, companies who are experiencing civil disputes, facing claims or legal risk relating to oil and gas operations. And that's where it pulls me in. Is the dispute central or, I guess you could say enmeshed with the company's oil and gas operations? If so, you need industry expertise, right? And clients overpay lawyers every day, because if you are in an industry and the dispute relates to your industry, when you hire a lawyer that doesn't understand your industry, I don't care how smart they are, they're gonna have to do some kind of research and spend some time getting up to speed. And when you hire, if it's an industry related dispute and you hire the right lawyer, you don't have to do that. Now, that doesn't mean I handle, any dispute an energy company would have. For example, if they're sued, I don't know, like in a large antitrust matter, right? I would say like call an antitrust expert, right? What I'm talking about are typically contract or tort disputes central to oil and gas operations. That's the easiest way to say it.
It's the
And I love
TLDR.
Yeah. And I mean, I am a trial lawyer. I do think that clients view me as someone to call when, there's a real risk at issue, whether the risk is that there could be bad law that's created in the case, or is the risk that they face potentially large damages, or is the risk that, and sometimes this is the risk that you have to go try a case in XYZ state court, and it's going to be a very hostile place to be, which I know, Justin, you mentioned to me yesterday or another time we talked about, how I went viral. And I know you said something about that earlier, but yeah, it can be scary. I mean, sometimes that is the risk, and you're going into a place and you're going to have to try this case in a very hostile and challenging jurisdiction and under sometimes insane circumstances, as it turns out. So
we'll call that foreshadowing. We'll get there, ladies and gentlemen. We'll get there.
Right. And
well, this will almost be a true crime episode in and of itself, right?
Right. Yeah.
One question just for clarification. Now, you are the office managing partner down there in Houston. You've mentioned Appalachia. right? Which obviously is a large area. Do you work almost exclusively in Texas? Do you work intra-nationally? Do you work internationally? What is the scope of where you help your clients?
Really, the shale. So as I was mentioning before, kind of the areas where the shale plays are, that's where the producers are. Typically, oil and gas disputes, and they can be brought in, in a variety of venues. But if the company's being sued, sometimes, they're getting sued in the place where they're producing the oil and gas, right? So if that's West Virginia, sometimes they're sued in West Virginia. If it's East Texas, right, they'll be sued in East Texas. I'm a Texas licensed lawyer, so this is my home state, my home license. So of course, oil and gas disputes filed here, yeah, easy. That's definitely 100% like I want those cases. Call me. But I mean, beyond that, Colorado, I've advised and helped clients in Colorado, New Mexico, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Kentucky, Utah is a place I'm like really interested in and kind of starting to talk to people about that. But yeah, Wyoming, North Dakota. So, I mean, it really can span the gamut. So really what pulls or what attracts the client to call me is not necessarily like where the case is filed. It's the subject matter, the expertise required, the risk, and the potential for trial, I think are the biggest, things that move the needle and having, a client call me. And, a track record of success, to be honest, we've had some pretty significant successes, and that helped. Right.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask you about those in just a minute. Let me shift footing here. We'll talk about the flip side of that coin first. So I'm sure in your storied career, your meteoric rise as a fascinating lawyer who's one of the top of her field, nobody bats 1,000 if you play long enough, right? I'm sure you've had a couple of strikeouts. I'm sure you've had a couple of moments that felt like failures or major setbacks. Can you tell my listeners about one of those times when just everything aligned wrongly? Maybe you didn't file the right form at the right time. Maybe you had a witness or deposition or something and it didn't go right. Maybe just you thought the case was going to go great, but you totally missed something. Tell my listeners, Lauren, about a time that you experienced a failure. But what did you learn from that? How do you carry that forward to make sure that you always, bring in your A game when you are representing your clients?
I guess what I would say was a time where I felt failure was after a trial that settled halfway through. And I guess the reason why, I felt because I did not feel that the company had any liability. And you get as a trial lawyer, and you should be this way, particularly by the time, you're halfway through trial, right? It's like such a strong belief that you're right and that your client is right. And justice, in my mind, right, is trying it all the way and getting that full win. But I've learned how wrong kind of that thinking was on my part, because of how self-centered it was, because the whole thing wasn't about me. And the trial and the outcome of it wasn't about it's not about a person. I succeeded or failed. It's about the client and about them minimizing their risk. And what is a win for them? Like, what is success for them? When has it been too much? When can, you know what I mean? It doesn't make sense for them to keep pushing it. And it can, and even when, right? Yeah, maybe they really don't owe any money, but from the company's perspective, this is a win to settle right now and walk away. And so I don't know. I think it was taking a step back and remembering as a trial lawyer, and I think lawyers and just professionals in general, we can and do think about ourselves sometimes, but I am very, cognizant. I was lucky to have mentors who drilled this into me from the moment I started practicing, and that, this is a client service industry. It's not about you. It's not about your law firm. It's about representing your client and doing the very best by them and what they need, and taking risk and sometimes doing things that people don't like. right? But if your client needs it to be done, it might be unpopular, right? You might even face personal blowback from it. But as their advocate and their lawyer, and they've trusted you with this, you do it without a second thought, is how I feel about it. So things like moving to disqualify judges is like can be a touchy subject, right? Nobody wants to do that. I'm going to be really honest with you. Nobody ever wants it to come to you're having to have a discussion with the judge, like, should you be on this case? I mean, right? It is terribly uncomfortable. It's just, oh, and you know how awkward everything is going to be, right? And so I think, being brave is so important. And I saw that in people that, I tried my first cases with, my mentors, and, remembering the same, and being brave, for them, but also recognizing at the same time that this is their battle, not yours, right? And so, I don't know, so I think it was reframing things, in a way, not maybe so much as failure, because like the client was happy, and it was a good outcome for them, right? And so learning to separate, myself and like my own personal feelings or ego sometimes, right, from the way things turn out. I don't know. Everybody wants that full defense verdict from the jury. If you're the trial lawyer, right? You're like, right?
Yeah.
And you want that moment, and then like and then I don't know, it's like it can be hard or disappointing, right? And especially because you put so much into it as a trial lawyer, particularly in a long trial, you're exhausted, and so then, the 180 of like, we're going into settlement, it's hard. But I will say that with experience and more time, it's gotten a lot easier, to take a step back and rethink. But I will say the times when I felt that I failed, I learned more and have been a much better lawyer since. So I don't really try not to really view things as failures anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've always said failure is just a slow burn win as long as you learn something from it. I'm curious, though, this is the inner philosopher in me. Is part of the issue that when you think you're right in a case, you as an attorney are seeking justice at the end of the day, right? There's an objective stance in reality, and you think you're pursuing that. And sometimes you have to rein in that drive towards justice for the sake of simply pursuing the end that the client wants. And I would imagine also some of it would even just be like, you think you've got the right solution and you want to know that you have the right solution, and you never get a chance to find out because everything just goes into settlement. And then there is no final decision saying this was the right and this was the wrong, or this is how it decided and everything else. Like, I guess part of that would have to be like knowing that you had a Christmas present and you could shake it and then you never got to open it.
That's a really good way of describing maybe the feeling, to be quite honest with you. And I've had this actually, I mean, earlier on in my career, it was a similar kind of situation. I remember being just like, I felt very frustrated. It was very like frustrating. But I remember sitting at counsel table, and I was second chair. It was one of my first trials, and my mentor was the first chair at trial. We were sitting there, it was like a 2-week long trial, like $500 million, and so the other side had put on their case, and I'm going to be really honest with you, like we were killing them. Okay. And, I could not wait. I was going to get to put on like the first witness of our case. So I'm sitting there like, I look like probably like a crazed dog or something, you know what I mean? Like, let's do this. And the client steps outside to the hallway. The other side was like, hey, can we talk? And so we're sitting at counsel table, and my mentor at the time like turned over to me and quietly was like, hey, they're probably going to work out a settlement out there, just so you know, so we're probably not gonna be putting on our case. Like, this is probably the end. And he was like kind of preparing, right? And it's funny because later he said he could tell, but it took like everything in me not to cry in that moment. And I like could feel my shoulders, and I was like, don't cry. And I do think it was like probably a tear, anyway, the case didn't end up settling, but I was so, like, oh, I don't know. And yeah,
all that work and effort you put in too.
Yeah, but also it's like your time to tell the client story, and that's been the whole point the whole time, right? That's what you've been building and creating, and like the whole point. So then to have like, it is kind of like, whoo, takes the steam out of it and can be exhausting. But, one thing I've learned from that, I will say, is taking care of yourself, right? During trial and after, as the lawyers, and that goes for every level, and the paralegals and everybody working, the experts, is taking time to yourself every day, getting outside, get fresh air, go eat somewhere. And then, after trial, like taking some time to decompress, and lawyers aren't good at that generally. But if you don't, you will burn out. Like you will, at least as a trial lawyer, you 100% will.
Makes sense. I mean, that's just good life advice too. So take care of yourself, ladies and gentlemen. Take care of yourself.
Right.
So you've had some amazing wins though. I'm sure you've got those, I always say it's a feather in the cap, right? The things that you're most proud of, like if you're falling asleep at night and you kind of like go back and replay some of the highlights of what you've done. What's one or two of the things, Lauren, that you're most proud about in your legal career? Cases that just you knocked it out of the park, or where you thought that everything was going against you, but then you pulled out a win that was bigger than you were expecting, or whatnot. What are a couple of the times you're most proud of?
Definitely in one of my first cases, and I think that every lawyer, at least trial lawyer, your first trials are special, but particularly when you win. And I was the associate on the case, meaning I am the master of every document. We had tens of thousands of documents, right? I am the master of every exhibit per trial, meaning like if the partner, where's this? I had to know, right? Who said this? Every person that, and there were 30 people who gave depositions, right? During the course of this 10-year case, right? I mean, it was literally becomes its own beast, right? Especially the cases tend to go on for years and years and years. And so to see that one all the way through, to have the client trust us to go all the way with it and, send it to the jury and then to win full defense, was, you just feel really good about it. And in some ways, I am more proud of like that win, even though I know that probably is weird to people, because I was like the low man on the totem pole. You know what I mean? Like the associate in charge of dealing with all of the things that keep everybody up at night, right? And and it was on me if something was wrong. But I'm almost like more proud of that win, and I think that that's why, right? Because I'm like,
you were the linchpin that held the whole thing together functionally, right?
yeah, it's like the gear in the machine, and you have all these things that you of course need to, but like the motor that's keeping everything running is like the key associate, doing all the discovery, reviewing all the documents, making right. And so I am really proud of that one. I also felt like the client was just right. So, and then they're right. And then also like the jury thinks they're right. So that's awesome. And then I would say, one thing I guess that I'm proud of that is maybe outside of litigation, and I don't know that I would say that it's a win, but I am like this. If you ever talk to people who know me, and I know it can be annoying to people, I get on soapboxes, but I am a big advocate for legal justice and, for things that I have seen so far in my career in trial and court that I have found deeply disturbing. Corruption and things that, and naivete, I don't think that I believed happened. And so to be quite honest, I am really proud that when asked by the investigators in West Virginia that, we spoke up and that, and even with that former judge threatening to sue me because he was, when I was speaking out about what happened during our trial where he pulled a firearm out during a private hearing at trial. I mean, he said I was lying and was threatening to sue me. And it was, that's scary, right? Even as a lawyer. But being brave enough to, to me, people cannot like the truth, but they can't change it. And it was just the truth. And it needed to be told because there were people hurting. It wasn't about, my client or even what happened to us. It was like, if this is happening here, what else is going on? And I know for a fact, that's probably the biggest, like, justice in a bigger sense that's meaningful to me as a person that's happened is that, that did come out. He, did have to resign and he did lose his law license. And that does limit, greatly his ability to hurt people in the future, at least in wielding power as he was. So I don't know. I am proud of that, but I would say that was just gravy on top of everything else, because legal wins are one thing, but when you can actually help people in my job, like really on a meaningful level that isn't about money or an oil and gas dispute, that's amazing. So I just feel lucky and blessed to have, you know what I mean, been at the right place at the right time, kind of, and a lot of people there locally feel that, I was like the right person at the right place, because it wasn't that people had not tried to complain. It wasn't that people, and didn't feel like they had a voice. And so sometimes I do think as a lawyer, it's using your position or your whatever it is, to give people a voice, right? And sometimes that's not always limited to just the courtroom, right?
Absolutely. So you just said the answer to the next question, and you said it really quickly, and a lot of my listeners are probably like, "Wait, what did she just say?" So let me just stop and go back, and I do want you to dive just slightly more into this, just for the sake of, I'm sure it's like a true crime drama, right? People want to know.
Yeah.
So one of the most absurd things you've ever encountered, and you became, for lack of a better word, an internet meme. You had your 15 minutes of internet fame. You were interviewed by People Magazine and all sorts of different places because you had something happen to you in a courtroom that has not happened to very many people. I think it happened in one of the Batman movies, right?
I
Where
think it did.
somebody in the courtroom pulls a gun on somebody, but even then it was like a hostile witness of the mob or something. But you had a judge pull a weapon on you and point it in your direction. How in the world did that happen? And what went through your head? And give us whatever details you can safely give us about that, because people, I think, really do want to know. Now that you dropped the bomb already, so
I know.
let's go back and pick up the pieces.
I know, but you would ask me like, what was the, and there's just nothing that pales in comparison. But I will say just a couple things, because I have had so many crazy things happen. And I was going to preview some of these before I guess we talk about this, but I had a witness one time who collapsed on the stand after being examined. We had to stop. There had to be an ambulance called. Like the witness was taken out on a stretcher. I'm like trying to think of I have had a lot of things, that I like cannot
A lot of
talk
absurdity
about that are really crazy. But yeah, so this goes back to one of the things I mentioned earlier about disqualifying judges, and being brave. And I'll probably get on a little soapbox at some point. But obviously, like I said,
box away.
I'm not from a family of lawyers. You know what I mean? Maybe I didn't know what I was getting into. But my point is, there were certain, I think, things that maybe I failed to realize, or either because of naivete or people just not talking about it. But I think that over in the legal profession, there has been a hesitancy. We kind of keep things in the family. You know what I mean? Like keep things within the legal community. And, there might be a judge who everyone believes is maybe conflicted or biased or whatever, but like people don't really say anything about it. And you know what I mean? Like you kind of just keep your mouth shut and go along. It's kind of what, kind of coming up, one could say is an very old millennial that I've kind of seen that's kind of different from, I would say, the older generations in mine. Like, for example, like, I think that there have been times when, 30, 40 years ago, there were lawyers who sometimes did know or uncovered undisclosed conflicts of judges. And they were either privately dealt with and like, conferences between the lawyers and the judge behind closed doors, or there were just conscious decisions that people weren't going to make waves, and law firms don't want to make judges mad, and, et cetera. But recently, and this is something people don't know, there is a federal law that requires all federal judges, now it's on the books, legislation requiring judges to submit financial disclosures. Why? Because they weren't doing it. Are they doing it now? The law was put in place more than a year ago. More than 60% of federal judges are not in compliance, and some are straight refusing. Why? I mean, it's concerning to me, but I will tell you, I have had a lot of lawyers and even, older attorneys who look at me like, why are you talking about this? Or like, you know what I mean? Or like, you're a troublemaker. Or I don't, you know what I mean? And that is bizarre to me. I'm like, I just thought everybody like didn't know, and so, but then you start realizing that no, a lot of people just don't want you talking about it. And so,
Hush, hush.
yeah. And so I think that has been, hard or interesting, but I believe that many times things like can and should be dealt with in ways that are not, having to move to, but when the client is in a situation and that is what they need to happen, then, in good faith and with a good faith basis and evidence, if you believe that a judge is conflicted, and the client's basically staring down the barrel of a loaded gun, for lack of a better term, you, with evidence, respectfully make the motions. And then, every state is different. So here's the other thing you don't know, like how you go about doing this, the procedure. But at least in the state that we were in, you make the motion. The law was kind of unclear about the procedure from there, but the one judge on their highest court reviews the motion and decides whether to grant it on the spot or whether you have to go to a hearing. And then the guy came back and said, you need to go to a hearing. So we were like, because we moved to disqualify several judges and went through it. So I was like, okay, you need to go to a hearing. But then they ordered us to go have the hearing in front of the judge we were seeking to disqualify.
That work out.
So I had to stand up in front of this judge and tell him why we believed he was conflicted and like could not be and wasn't there and was not a proper judge to sit on the case pursuant to state law. I mean, you cannot imagine a moral. I mean, as I'm sure you probably can. And it related to, so in that case, so for instance, the things that particularly like will cause conflicts are, financial dealings really with either side or, financial interests held by the judge, kind of that go with either party, right? Well, as it turned out, we discovered that the judges have oil and gas leases, right? Well, our case was defending a company against a group of plaintiffs who were suing, saying that my client didn't pay properly under the leases. The judge had the same kind of leases. Do you get what I'm saying? Like the decision in our case is going to help the judge's family, right? Because that was one way they tried to, the argument, because this was how bizarre it was at the hearing, the judges basically argued back and like defended them. It was the most bizarre thing I've ever been involved in. Actually, more bizarre than the hearing where the gun came out, because it was like literally the one judge started basically testifying on the record in the hearing that he was presiding over about his family, about why the oil and gas leases held by his parents, like he had no financial interest in them, about how fair he could be. It was crazy to me. Like I just said, we had no idea what was going on, right? But obviously you can imagine, and I do not blame them as a judge, and I know that their jobs are hard, particularly state court judges. They are, overloaded, tired, particularly in rural jurisdictions, like their dockets, it's crazy, right? And I understand how hard their jobs are. I understand how difficult it would be to have, lawyers come forward and say that they didn't believe you could be fair on their case. Like, don't get me wrong, I would take it personally, right?
Yeah.
And so, of course, they do. Well, one of the judges is disqualified. So we're done. We don't have to go back to him. The other one, the highest court, the same guy who told us to go to the hearing, then reviews the hearing transcript and says, you have to go back to him to try the case. So the judge where we just tried to get him off the case is now going to have to preside over our trial. And he is, So right after he gets that ruling from the Supreme Court, he orders us in for a hearing for no reason. And we knew. I mean, it was like stomach and knot, me and my co-counsel, you're just sitting in the hallway like this is going to be so bad. The other side was back in chambers with the judge, laughing like it was a family reunion. And we were sitting out there like, oh no. So he calls the hearing to order. He like basically asked me to approach and stand up. And he's like, well, court has determined that I have no conflicts and blah, 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 and goes on this whole tirade. I was in such a, and then he stops and he looks down and he looks at me and he leans in and he goes, nice try. And I was like, gulp. I mean, you can imagine, right? I mean, even his own court reporter, that's what you start to realize is the court staff in some of these courts with particularly corrupt judges, right? That they are scared too. I can tell the people working with these guys are scared. You can tell that, like, he said that, and everybody in the courtroom was like he should have never brought that up. Like,
Yeah.
It was crazy and scary. And so by the time we got to trial, tensions were high. We were a week into trial. He calls a Saturday hearing of counsel only. I don't know. The gun came. I think that he wanted it to be over. I think he was trying to scare us. And allegedly he was angry because we had security with us at trial. And that's a long story, but I have been threatened, like personally threatened in the town previously when they're for court appearances that led to my involvement with federal agencies, right? So, I think he was mad about the security being there and just mad we were there at all. He hated us. He would have made it very, like, he hated me, like personally hated me. I mean, and made it very obvious. So that was the craziest thing that's ever, I mean, set of conditions, but yeah, I don't know. That's how we ended up there.
So weird. So now just to re-clarify, so he takes out a gun and he just like set it down, sort of like directed at you,
He
or
kind of was like, why do you have security? Aren't me and my guns enough? Because by the way, it breaks during trial. He would unzip his robe and he had like guns strapped to him, like Predator or something. And I'm like, but I also kind of thought maybe it was like a macho, you know what I mean, kind of thing. Like, he was funny. Like, he had a funny sense of humor. Like, I mean, there were times when he made me cry laughing, making fun of the other side. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I mean, off the record, he was as much of a character as he was on the record. We'll leave it at that. But honestly, by the time the gun came out, it wasn't even, that's how crazy things had gotten. He pulls the gun and does kind of a scan. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And like across the defense counsel table. So it was me, my partner, and then my co-counsel. And those were the only people allowed in the courtroom. He would not allow our security in. And his normal court staff wasn't there. Red flag, red flag. I knew. Walking up the courthouse stairs, I turned to our co-counsel and I was like, something bad is about to happen. It was a Saturday. Nobody has hearings on Saturday. The bailiff wasn't his normal bailiff, right? None of the normal courthouse security is there. He wouldn't even let my paralegal come in, who is a man. So I was like, oh my God, like, what is going to happen? And then the courthouse doors locked. We could hear them after we had gone through the metal detectors behind us. And then when we entered the courtroom, I could hear the courtroom doors locked. And I was like, they have like locked us in here. It was scary. It was so, I don't think other people, I don't know, but you just put your head, I don't know. It's hard for me to remember what I was thinking. I just, I proceeded to argue the hearing. I remember in the moment being like, whoa, because that's just kind of how I am. Like, I'm going to come out. Yeah. So then he puts it down on the podium because I'm the one arguing. So I'm standing. And he like lays it down and then tilts his head and makes sure the barrel aligns with me. Right? Like, so that it's setting and resting, pointing directly at me. Yeah. And makes it a point, like deliberately, like, and I kind of laughed. That's just how I am. I don't know. I was like awkwardness or something, but I kind of laughed like, okay. And I proceeded to say, look, we have been threatened. That's why we have security. But no, judge, like, you and your guns are enough. And you know what I mean? Like, let's all calm down. And then he asked me a question about the actual merits for the hearing. And I argued the hearing. The gun remained out the whole time. At one point, we all had to approach the bench. My co-counsel remembers looking down, like, the barrel of the gun. Like, it was literally, because when you approach the bench, right, you're right there and they're higher. So it was like at eye level, and she remembers looking at it. Anyway, so hearing is over. We actually won the issue. So I was like, oh, okay, great. We get in the car. We go back to the hotel. It takes us like 3 hours before we look at each other like, oh my God, it's almost like a delayed trauma response, I think. And you're like so sleep deprived and in trial, but it took us a while to like understand the gravity of what had just occurred. Yeah. And I obviously had we'll just leave that, a relationship with federal agencies. And so, they were really our first phone call once we kind of came to terms with what happened. But,
And that's why oil and gas law can be way more exciting than criminal law.
I think people would say it's me. I just tend to have crazy things happen, like the witness collapsing. Like I've had things happen that attorneys who've tried more cases than me have never had happen ever, right? And so I don't know how to explain it. I really don't. But it's been a wild ride, but a fun ride. Most of my cases are not that exciting. Most cases don't go to trial. Just being really honest for the listeners. But when you're in that position and no one wants to be like trying a case that's so stressful, but you need someone who will be brave for you and, take on the hard cases and, go back before a judge when he's going to be mad and hate you and maybe even hate you personally, right? Maybe even more than like your client when you're just doing your job. And I've said that to people before. I'm doing my job, but it's, but people can still definitely, it can get really heated, one could say, but there's also, it tends to be a lot of money at stake in my cases. And, I think we can all agree. I mean, money makes people act crazy.
No, absolutely does.
And so I think that that's kind of the root of it generally, at least in mine. And obviously I do think that the judge and I understand this too, the former judge, like, was embarrassed that like we had called him out, like that there were details about his family and the oil and gas interests they have and his parents. And I get that, like, especially as a judge, you don't want like personal details out there about like your life, your family, your parents, or really, maybe their finances, but all that's required is that the judge disclose, right? I mean, I've had a case where the judge was best friends with the other side, with the wife of the other side's lawyer. The judge, though, was a former partner at my law firm, right? So you could say equally kind of biased. She, on the record, immediately at the beginning of the case, said both things. I'm best friends with attorney XYZ's wife. Well, we see each other all the time. Well, we don't discuss his work, but I was a partner at this, defendant's law firm for the XYZ years. Put it all on the record. Does anyone have any objection to me continuing to preside over the case? Do you want further information? Should we analyze, and everyone waved. Everyone on the record said, nope, we're good, judge. That's all we're asking. It's not like the judge can't have leases. It's not like they can't do these things, but they have to tell people. And that's all. And that's, I think, also worth remembering is like judges are people, obviously. It's just being honest about what you have and putting it out there. It doesn't mean that, you are, conflicted, but, let the parties decide if they want, to challenge it or maybe, then the judge can also choose to step down and doesn't have to go through that whole process, right? If somebody objects, they can say, okay, fine, I'll step down, I'm done, right? But yeah.
Well, it feels almost like it almost would be on your end of things could be worded such you're saying, listen, judge, it's not that I think you're biased. It's that I don't want this court decision to have the appearance of bias. I don't want that to reflect poorly on you. So I want you to be able to simply just say, you know what, this is not the case for me because there's a perceived conflict that may not even be a real conflict. So why don't you just go back to golfing?
That's exactly right. And I will tell you, most of the times judges, it doesn't even take another, they're like, okay, great, bye. You know what I mean? Like,
great.
Right. And what I think kind of set off alarms for me, particularly here, was like the persistence of certain judges to fight, to stay on the cases was crazy, was really like surprising. I did not expect that. And so, because that had never really been my experience. And so I was a little taken back by that, but you're exactly right. We're not saying it's the appearance, and it not only protects the judge, it protects the whole system, right? Because other people looking in, right? Like everybody in that small town knows that the judge's family has oil and gas leases. Now he's sitting on a case about an oil and gas lease dispute, right? It doesn't look fair. And that's the reason for the rule. It's the appearance of impropriety. We don't want people to question whether the courts are fair, right? So let's not give anybody any reason to, right? That's
Absolutely.
really
No, that makes perfect, and that's kind of what I was trying to say too. I think it makes perfect sense, and the
Mhm.
fact that they would want to stay on so hard, it makes you almost wonder if they have a vested interest. I mean, if you're going to fight it that hard, and especially if other absurd things, the absurd icing on the absurd cake, you know, other things are going to happen,
Very.
it definitely raises a lot of questions. Well, Lauren, I don't want to take up your whole day. You've already given me the better part of an hour of your time. So I want to be respectful of your time as well. I know you've got things to do, and you're definitely a very busy person. So here in a few minutes, we'll probably start winding down the call for your own sake. But I really enjoy the conversation. One of the most engaging and just fascinating discussions we ever had. Um, let me ask you this though, and this is more just I want your 10,000 foot overview on where things are going in your particular focus of the legal realm, looking towards the future. What emerging trends do you think are going to be coming down the pipeway for the energy sector? Do you think renewable energies, and do you think climate issues are going to play a huge role in fracking and extracting of natural gas and oil, drilling for oil and everything else? I know that, for instance, and I never make this podcast any more political than my guest wants to make it. I will mention these only from a purely neutral political perspective. President Trump seemed to be very pro drilling for oil, fracking for natural gas. President Biden, when he came in, reversed a lot of those decisions, made it a lot harder to drill. It seems President Trump has said if he wins again in 2024 this year, his day one is drill baby drill. I think it's quoting Sarah Palin, if I recall. And so clearly there are major federal policies that affect what people are doing, whether it's drilling or not drilling, whether it's pursuing renewables, pursuing other kinds of energy. What's coming down the pipeline that you think is going to be affecting you and your clients in the foreseeable future?
So interestingly, I mean, the climate change lawsuit wave, unfortunately, is kind of just beginning. And what I mean by that is a lot of these cases, if you study them and you look at the trends of the allegations being made and where those lawsuits are being filed, they're kind of test balloons. So, for example, you have like the youth climate test balloons, right? Which kind of started with Montana, meaning you have a lawsuit brought by a youth climate organization, meaning like the youth of a state, right? And bringing constitutional claims under a state constitution, right? That's a very kind of niche of a type of climate change case, right?
Right.
Then you have what I call like the municipality, city, local, state, local government, cases. Those are ones where it's like, for example, city of Honolulu or whatever, suing, any number of very large oil and gas companies whose names we see at gas stations, saying, look, use fossil fuels and damage, the environment in Honolulu and, seeking damages, right, from the companies, but from like local governments. And so, and what I'm trying to say, and like the test balloons there for those kinds of claims. And then, I think there's going to be additional litigation. You'll see a wave of cases. So, for example, the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, just enacted a rule about climate disclosure reporting and what large oil and gas companies are required to disclose. And they're required to disclose greenhouse gas emissions, except for scope 3. So scope 1 and scope 2, and there's other language in there about, weather related risks, disclosing those. So you have a federal agency now putting in like a disclosure law. I can tell you, anytime any government agency puts in a law requiring energy companies to, make certain disclosures or report certain things, there is going to be litigation, right? I mean, because, well, what does that mean? Well, is that material, right? Did I have to disclose this, and or what is a weather related risk, right? There's going to be fights about that, as well as it kind of impacts already a trend in litigation where the next kind of bucket I was going to say relates to climate disclosures, right? So we see lawsuits alleging that, companies like knew the quote risks or dangers and, committed fraud and either quote hiding those or in failing to disclose them. So we even see more like tort. That's what you call a tort. Your fraud, your trespass kind of lawsuits, right? which is kind of its own little bucket. So you have like states and local governments suing, saying you trashed our city or state and you owe us damages. Then you have kind of the youth climate or activists, and that litigation is kind of limited because those lawsuits, at least to date, have revolved around state constitutions that include guarantees for a clean and healthful environment. For example, the Texas state constitution does not guarantee a clean and healthful environment. Pennsylvania's does, Montana's does, Hawaii's does. So obviously you would expect, now that we've seen, this youth climate case go all the way to trial, meaning the claims weren't dismissed, they got a verdict, all those other cases and all those other states, it's, domino. So what I'm trying to say is we are so much at the very forefront of what I think is going to happen, unfortunately, based on at least the decisions to date, because the courts are generally finding that these cases can proceed in state court. That opens, you could imagine, only got to basically a copycat lawsuit in every state. I mean, you're dealing with emissions. Like, I don't even understand. I mean, conceptually, to me, and we won't get into it, I have some problems with some of the legal claims that are being made and whether there's any standing or any, I think, really legal claim that can be pursued, particularly in state court. But, the courts so far that's what's happening. And so you face, different decisions, right, on the same issue, depending on the jurisdiction, but also having to defend and fight in multiple jurisdictions. State court is generally not the place, you want to be for any like uniformity and consistency, certainly among states, as you can imagine. And it's just scary, right? How do you quantify these damages? And so it's scary to think of like how outrageous, I'm being honest, some of these verdicts could be, very wrongly, in my opinion. And I don't believe that they would withhold, a well written appeal, but that doesn't help. And the company still has to go through, right? I don't know how many years of protracted litigation and a $500 million verdict. And the years on appeal to finally be proven like this should have never happened. I mean, I think it's terrible. I think it's like, that's, something that's going to be difficult. The other thing I will say is that, one trend I've seen, and I think we will see more of, and so it doesn't really, the presidency, I don't know, it doesn't really come into place so much. I will say that the federal agencies themselves have seen to become much more aggressive, much more like, instituting investigations into companies, utilizing their agency powers of subpoena, et cetera, right? Agencies like the FTC, we see like challenges to pipeline projects, right? Like large regulatory actions. And we've seen that regulatory agencies on a federal level have become much more active. Again, that is another situation that always spawns litigation in a lot of ways that people don't know, right? Because if FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, if I'm a pipeline, I end up in some sort of, I don't know, enforcement proceeding with FERC, I may end up also having private lawsuits with different parties to contract because of what FERC has said or what FERC has done, right? I mean, that's how it is like trickle down. Right. But in that way it is. And so I think we're going to see more and more litigation that spawns off enforcement actions by federal agencies generally, just because I think energy is kind of under a spotlight.
Trickle down legalnomics.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I like that.
Random question. You do trials. You've been in front of juries before. Have you ever been on a jury? Would you like to be on a jury? Have you ever been disqualified for being on a jury? And would you ever consider being a judge?
Oh, these are all such good questions. I've never been on a jury. I'm dying to be on a jury. I don't feel that I have any hope for ever getting on one, but I mean, maybe I'm told if there's an attorney malpractice case, that sometimes on those cases that go to trial, they actually almost, I mean, you could see it could be helpful almost. Yeah. And having attorneys on the jury, but most of the time, I mean, I'm like, get that guy out of here. You don't want them, they'll like armchair quarterback you or like critique you the whole time or act like they know the law. Like nobody wants a lawyer in the jury room. No. So I think my chances are gone. And I believe that you said, would I ever be a judge?
Knowing what you've known, experiencing what you've experienced.
I will do everything I can in supporting certain colleagues and people I've had the privilege of practicing with, and becoming judges if and when they decide to. I do think it's so important to get great lawyers and honest and ethical people on the bench. But I honestly cannot imagine being a judge. And I'm going to tell you, no one would ever like me. Anybody listening to this is going to be like, yeah, no, that's right. I mean, no, I'm not political. So the federal idea is really out for me. And state court, no. I mean, that's usually like an election, and no, I'm not. I can be known as a divisive person at times. I don't know. No. But I so greatly admire them. And one of my mentors today is a judge, is a former retired judge who actually presided over one of my first trials. And so I, really just appreciate and like treasure her advice. It's like beyond, invaluable, truly. So
Yeah, that's fair. Well, here in a minute, I'm going to ask you my last two questions. I'm going to give those to you now so you can percolate on them while I jump over and take a look at your site. Question number one will be, if we can go back in time, meet young Lauren and give her some advice, other than the obvious, buy some Bitcoin and hold it till 60, 70K, and also maybe wear bulletproof armor in the courtroom.
right.
What advice would you give young Lauren and why? And then the other question is, if I gave you my magical pen, and I have a pen here from an Abbey, a Benedictine Abbey in Atchison, Kansas, which is where I live. And today's actually the feast day of these monks. St. Benedict is his feast day. And so one of the priests blessed this pen. And I found that this magic pen this holy pen, this blessed pen, can strike laws from the books, edit laws that are on the books, or add laws to the book. So if I were to let you borrow this magical pen, free shout out and plug to kansasmonks.org. But if I let you borrow this pen, and you could make one change, what change would you make and why? So while you're percolating on that, I'm going to jump over and take a look again at your law firm. Again, I'm talking with Lauren of Varnado, and she is the office managing partner over at the Houston branch of Michelman Robinson LLP. That is mrllp.com. As always, link in the description down below. She clearly has a wealth of knowledge and experience, especially when it comes to gas and petrochemical law and everything else. Would be a wonderful resource. So if you're one of our listeners who happen to find yourself, needing someone like that, she would be a wonderful resource. And again, link in the description down below. Really quickly, our last sponsor for this show today is Rank with News. If there was a guaranteed way to get your law firm or your business featured in major national publications like Yahoo News, Forbes, Bloomberg, and others, and see those articles ranking locally, even nationally, sometimes in under 8 hours for major competitive keywords that people were actually looking for, what else would you need to know? Rank with News is simply the most powerful way to hit page one in under 2 weeks safely, organically, and permanently. It's functionally guaranteed SEO, search engine optimization on steroids, ranking quickly and sticking, again, indefinitely. If you're tired of poor visibility for your business, visit rankwithnews.com or rankwith.news to learn more and book a time to speak with a specialist about featuring your firm or your business in major national 8-figure traffic sites that can launch you to page one in a matter of hours and help you dominate your local marketplace. Get media exposure, rank higher in Google, build credibility, and win more customers and clients with Rank with News. And I will say it's probably easier to use that service than it is to get a gun pointed at you and become a viral meme. But that's just my suspicion. I could be wrong. So, Lauren, final two questions. We go back in time, we meet young Lauren. You're able to give her just a little piece of advice moving forward. What advice would you give to yourself and why?
Trust in yourself more. Trust in your instinct and your ability more. That would really be it. I don't know. I think everybody has times of like self-doubt or questioning or, feeling, I don't know, like, right? Everybody struggles with that, feeling we're not good enough.
Well, and that's like imposter syndrome too, right? The more you know, the more you assume your knowledge is base level for everyone. Like, everyone knows, all these things.
Right. So there were times when I had thoughts or ideas or instinct and didn't maybe voice them, right? Because I didn't feel like I don't know, that it was something that was unique or helpful or, I don't know, you talk yourself out of it. So yeah, I would definitely give myself a pep talk, maybe.
There you go. That's good advice. Trust in yourself. And for everyone else, if you're getting started in law, trust in
Mhm.
yourself. All right. So I give you my magic pen, Lauren. And with this pen, you can make a change. You can add a law, strike a law, or edit a law from the books. When I give you this pen, what law are you going to change and why? And this can be a major law with national or even international ramifications, or it can just be that stupid local law that makes you fill out forms in triplicate 8 times a week, right? What law are you going to change and why?
I'm gonna choose one that's central to my practice. Um, I would get rid of the class action rules generally.
As
Like,
in no more class
so
action
no
lawsuits
more
or
class action.
wow. I know a
Or
handful
at
of attorneys that
minimum,
are
I
not
would,
happy
or
with
at
that.
minimum, I would limit them solely to consumer. I mean, very strict, like very strict limitations. But to be quite honest, I would get rid of it. I mean, it, I just feel like the requirements are rarely, at least the way it comes up in, what I do in the oil and gas industry and, in defending oil and gas companies and upstream and midstream litigation, the requirements are like basically never met. It's kind of, but it's scary, right, for the companies. And frequently, most times you cannot appeal the certification order, right? So the court says, we're going to treat everybody the same and lump you all together. Now, so company, instead of owing maybe this one guy, maybe $5,000, you owe the whole state $5 billion, right? And
Yeah.
we're going to treat all these people the same, right? Say a judge goes and enters an order like that. A lot of the times, under the rules in the different states and the federal rules, you're not going to get to appeal it. You then have to go try a case basically against the whole state, right? It's crazy. I mean, and I think there is massive abuse and misuse of the class action mechanism in the plaintiffs bar, certainly in the oil and gas industry. And I'll just leave it at that.
Fair enough. Fair
You
enough.
know who you are now.
Well, Lauren, thank you very much for taking this time to talk with me today. This has been a very enjoyable conversation. I've learned a lot and been genuinely entertained. I talk to lawyers all the time, and some of the conversations are very dry, and that's how it is. But you've been an absolute delight to talk with.
Oh,
So
well, thank you.
thank you very
Thank
much for that.
you.
I always like to let my guests have the final word. Is there any parting words of wisdom you'd like to leave our listeners with before we close down the conversation?
Sure. I mean, I guess I would say thank you to you. And I wanted to also, I think what you're doing is like very valuable, shedding light on attorneys and what they do and the legal practice, like I suggested earlier. I think it's kind of been like a closed box or, like almost like a secret society. And I think there should be a lot more, public inside knowledge about like what's going on in our court system. And in, courts every day that maybe aren't broadcast on court TV. Maybe they don't make, entertainment tonight, but there are important decisions happening and, the public having more, insight and knowledge and understanding of the process, can only help them and, protecting their own rights, and the rights of their companies and their clients and customers.
Well, again, thank you, Lauren. Really appreciated the conversation. This has been The Attorney Post. I am your host, Justin West, as always. If you are watching this on YouTube, we always appreciate a like, a subscribe, and a share. If you know somebody who, especially in this case, works in the oil and or gas industry, and this would be a beneficial conversation for them to hear, please feel free to share this podcast with them in video form or audio form. Again, on YouTube, we like a like, a subscribe, and a share. If you're listening to this on any of the podcast repositories, please feel free to rate us and share us as well. Again, this is The Attorney Post. I've been chatting with Lauren Varnado. She works with Michelman Robinson. Link in the description down below. As always, this podcast does not constitute legal advice, even though we are talking about a whole host of legal issues. And if you have a legal issue, you should always seek the advice of a competent attorney in your area who focuses on the matter that you need issue with. If you listen this far in the conversation, you're probably sold on Lauren as much as I am. So please feel free to reach out to her if she would be helpful for you. And until next time, remember, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. Thanks for listening, guys. And until next time, bye-bye.